All right, welcome back to the Modern Revolution. My name is Pete Deely, and once again, the divine has smiled on me and brought me a great guest to talk with today. I'm sure you're going to find him fascinating, and his name is D. Paul Fleming. So, sir, thank you for spending some time with me.
Hey, I appreciate the invite, and we're gonna have some fun.
I have no doubt. I have no doubt. Okay, listen. As our tradition is here, is we like to start with what problem are you trying to solve in the world?
Veteran suicide.
Okay. Now, that's a big, complicated, uh, audacious, you know, problem to be tackling. Did your decision to decide to put your energy against this problem happen to you in an epiphany, or did it happen incrementally over time? That's, slowly you came to this decision that I want to spend my energy wrestling with veteran suicide.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a long answer, so
It's
let me
okay.
give you a cliff note.
Okay.
If everybody's familiar with the My Pillow guy, right?
Yeah, sure.
So he solved the fluffy pillow issue, right?
Okay. Yes,
When nobody really knew there was a fluffy pillow issue.
it's true.
Well, very few people understand the pandemic, the true nightmare of what's going on within the veteran community. And I like to say, based on my decades of research and being engaged in the space, there are more than 50 veterans a day per day committing suicide. And that number could be 100 veterans a day committing suicide. Nobody really knows. The most accurate information that have access to is in At Ease Veterans Magazine. It's an
Okay.
article that and a report that's backed by Columbia University that takes the VA numbers from pre 2019, and their 8 state report shows that the number is 2.4 times higher
Mm,
than the VA's number of 18 per day. I got to
okay.
caveat that because that was the year that the VA said, "Oh, veteran suicide's been reduced," and it was debunked as soon as that report was issued as a bogus VA report that used a very narrow sliver to identify to show a decrease in veteran suicide. Veteran suicide has skyrocketed, especially in the last 4 years. And the sad part is women veterans are the third highest category of suicide, and
Wow.
they only make up 20% of the military force, if you will.
Mm. Oh my goodness. Well, eh, could you tell us a little bit about your relationship to the military and sort of before we jump into this work, perhaps you could describe, yourself as a veteran as well.
Yeah, so I went in the military at 17. Um, there's a number of reasons behind that,
Okay.
including that I had an upbringing that was somewhat challenging. I was homeless at 14 and on my own.
Wow.
Um, a gentleman in a long black robe really wanted to see my enlistment papers in front of him,
Oh
so
my
I
goodness.
talk about that in my latest book.
Okay.
But when I went in the military, I loved it. It was a little bit boring at first. Boot camp was not as hard as most people think it is. For me, it was very easy.
Okay.
And then transitioning into the fleet and becoming a fleet sailor and being deployed for a couple of years, it was a pretty wild ride.
Hmm.
But the Navy tried to kill me a couple times. It didn't take. Now
Okay.
the VA's trying to kill me, and I'm
Oh my
still not
God.
letting that take. Right? But I did. I had a couple of times where I was pretty much dead. There was
How
gaps
did,
of 30 hours where I don't remember. I got tossed around pretty good on one operation. Anyway, um, so transitioning from the military, I thought everything was fine. Okay,
mhm.
but shortly after, I realized that something was wrong, and then within a couple of years of my discharge, I was retired and issued a 100% disability. And I was newly married. I looked at my wife and I said, "Man, there's something wrong with me. I gotta find somebody to talk to." And
Right.
this is going back 35 years, 40 years now.
Okay.
So something happened, and that's the long and short of it. And I spent through decades fighting suicide. You
Okay.
know,
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you probably detail the story in your books, and I mean, when you talk about 30 hours, a date with suicide is D. Paul Fleming's one of his books
date with
available.
suicide.
A
What's
date
that?
with suicide. Yeah, and
A
I'm
date with
assuming
suicide.
did I? Yeah, I say that right. Okay,
You did
and
right to the. It's right to the point.
right to the point. Um, what was the so? Could you maybe lay out the path between the physical trauma and then the mental repercussions of the trauma for you, and then maybe you can use that as a framework to talk about why this pandemic is happening, because I gotta think that your experience informed how you understand all the people who you're speaking to try to heal this problem.
Yeah, yeah. So the challenge with vets is we don't talk about trauma.
Hmm.
We'll joke about everything under the sun.
Right.
We'll poke fun at each other, but we don't talk about our trauma, especially our trauma in the military. The DoD report from the previous year showed that 36,000 sexual assaults were reported in 1 year,
Oh my
and
God.
that's roughly going to be about 30% of the actual cases of sexual assault, where the majority of that 97% are women. So the
Hmm.
majority of women that are sexually assaulted, anything from harassment to brutal rape, don't report it, and then they spend the rest of their lives trying to survive under what had happened.
Right.
That's one of the leading causes of suicide in the to our female veterans.
Right.
For me, the physical trauma is what it is. I've never complained. Again, I got crushed between a USS Dallas and an ocean going ship when we were doing transfers,
Oh
and
my
for
goodness.
all practical purposes, should have been dead. But baby Jesus had something else for me.
Right.
He said, "I've got something else in store for you."
Right.
So
Well.
but it's the mental anguish. It's the
Right.
things that we don't talk about that build up, and then they take over your mental, your physical, your emotional, and your spiritual bodies over a long period of time. And once all four of those are compromised, you're a mess, and that's where PTSD gets its hardest grab, and that walks you down the path to suicide. The pain, the anguish.
So it seems to me that, I mean, you went into the military as a young man, and most 17-year-olds don't have the vocabulary to talk about like their internal experience. And that, however, so you go in and then you have this, set of experiences. And as you come out, you now have the vocabulary and the self-awareness to recognize I'm not the person that I intend to be, and I have problems that I, need to figure out. Was that self-awareness something that you always carried with you and you knew? Um, or did like you mature into that because, step by step, different things happened to you and then you were able to recognize, which I'm sure saved you a lot of problems that, if you don't have that self-awareness, generally speaking, the problems just metastasize into worse and worse manifestations. So how did you come to that self-awareness?
Yeah. So for me, it was very simple. I
Okay.
was I would get angry for absolutely no reason.
Right.
A commercial, somebody says something,
Right.
a sound,
Okay.
or a loud noise,
Right.
and I would get mad, and not just mad, but I mean warrior anger and absolute fight and flight mode.
Wow.
Okay, that
That's all right.
so that was my, I don't want to say trigger, but it was saying something to me that something's wrong, and I just kept looking at my wife saying, "There's something wrong with me. Why would I get so angry?" And then the other thing is, same thing, like watching a commercial, and I would start getting emotional, all right, and I didn't understand why. So that was back in the very early 1990s, way before PTSD mental health were becoming a
Right.
a public topic. Again,
Right.
I was declared a 100% disabled vet back in a time when disability was as commonplace as saying mentally retarded. Okay,
Okay.
especially for veterans, because this was still post Vietnam. I wasn't in Vietnam, but I'm saying it's still the post Vietnam era, pre
Right.
9/11, before everybody fell back in love with their veterans.
Hmm.
So there wasn't that support out there. There wasn't that um,
Yeah.
pick up the phone and call a therapist. So I
Right.
had to search for a therapist, and when I found her, that was quite an experience. And I write about that in the book. But it was the starting point of decades, and I mean decades, of trying to figure this out that culminated in 2018 when I said, that's it. I've either got to finish this and kill myself, or I've got to find peace. I can't live like this anymore. Spoiler alert, I chose the path with peace. So,
Yeah. Thank God. Um, you must have been terrifying. I mean, you must have
yeah.
been terrifying as you would get angry like that. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah,
yeah, tell me. I mean,
yeah,
I don't, your wife must have been scared. Other people must have been scared. You're trained military person, big, strong guy, furious. Like
yeah.
it must have made all relationships difficult.
Yes, yes. And one of my aunts would say he was such a happy kid when he went in the
Right?
service. When he came
Yeah.
out, that happy boy was gone.
Right.
Okay. So of course it affected all of my relationships. And I went into a tunnel and withdrew from society.
Right.
Now, personally, I like being alone. Okay. I enjoy it. All right.
Right.
But if you took away the military trauma, the PTSD, the mental health issues, I would have been a much more social person.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
It's clear to me that the trauma, the refusing to talk about it, was the thing that, pulled me into my shell, even though I do like being by myself.
Right.
And yeah, it is an awakening to see a vet throw a temper tantrum, when he's triggered.
Without a doubt. So I mean, as an introvert, which I think, is a way of saying you like to be by yourself, writing books and talking and podcasting is contrary to that kind of impulse. So, what was it as you kind of dealt with your own issues that led you into wanting to talk and help other people?
Yeah. So um, I have a deep faith,
Hmm.
and in my journey, if you will, I lost my way. I was pissed off at God for quite a while.
Sure.
Didn't blame him, but I was upset. And then when I started finding my way back to spirituality, my Native American heritage kind of kicked in, and I found some peace and comfort there. And then my Christianity kind of came back into play.
Okay.
So for me, reconnecting with spirituality, my faith was a key step and a key piece for me. All right. And I apologize. I'm not sure how we got down that trail. I lost the main point.
Well, I mean, often when we associate suffering with meaning and it becomes not just suffering but fuel for other things, the suffering gets transformed, in my opinion, into something else. So it seems to me at some point in time, if it was your connection to the divine that all of a sudden says to you, listen, all the difficult things that you've been through are potent tools, potent medicine for other people. So I'm curious about that transition because it would seem that for an introvert in particular would require a lot of effort, courage, those types of things.
Yeah. So there's no way on God's green planet you would have told me I would be an author. I'd be publishing books,
Right,
especially books about my past, because
right,
my first book, the first book I put out is 2,442 Steps to Crazy.
right.
This book will you won't be able to put this one down. The
Okay,
reviews on that are unbelievable. Okay.
right,
But it's a hell of a story. And when I was called to write these things, I'm like, who the hell wants to listen to my story? Why would
right,
anybody want to hear about this? Right.
right.
So I wrote it. I figured out how to publish. I put it out there. And then I sat back going, man, I'm going to get my butt handed to me, right?
Right.
I was shocked at how many people stood up and said, thank you for telling your story. Can I tell you mine?
Yes.
I didn't, it was never that bad for me, but oh my God. And then a lot of people I grew up with, I can't tell you how many people reached out and said, Jesus, Doug, I didn't know I didn't know what was going on.
Right.
Um, so for me, though, to get back to your answering your question,
Right.
it, it was literally divine intervention that said to me, you need to tell these stories. You need to be talking about veteran suicide. You need to be talking about your childhood. And I'm like, all right, so here we are. Now, remember I said in 2018, I made a decision. It was either finish suicide or, find peace.
Right.
In the course of that, learning to talk about my trauma, learning to write about my trauma is
Hmm.
extremely healing. All right.
Okay.
But listen, I wasn't going to go for any of this kumbaya stuff. Not happening. I'm not telling you anything. Right. Then when I started talking about it, when I
Yeah.
started writing about it and getting it out there, it was literally the weights lifting off of me, almost like an angel was picking me up and carrying me as people came forward and said, thank you for sharing your story.
What is it about, because that's not the first time I've heard this. So what is it about communicating these painful things that is healing? Why does that happen like that?
Yeah. So the starting point is we're trained to not complain. Okay.
Mhm.
But here's the big one. The guy that you had on he was in country for
Yeah.
17 days, lost his legs.
Right.
Who's got it worse, me or him?
Oh, I'm not in the business of quantifying suffering, like I don't know.
So here's a vet answering that question.
Right.
Listen, everybody's got it worse than me. Everybody.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
And that's basically the vet mentality.
Right.
Okay. You don't complain about your suffering, suck it up and get it done. Okay. You're a warrior. You don't
Right.
complain, you lead.
Right.
Okay. So, you know, the biggest part of that is getting veterans to start talking about their trauma. So I
Yeah.
tell it to them like this: listen, something's going to explode, either your story or your insides, one or the
Right.
other.
Right.
Something's going to break.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've often heard the idea that like depression is anger turned inward, right? Like if you're, stuck in that traumatic, depressed situation, and you're not like you're exploding as a younger person was a certain way of getting out, I imagine, like the pain. And so your mechanism to get at the pain out wasn't serving you per se, but it was probably protecting you in some way from what happened later. As you say, you're either going to finish suicide or you're going to move on and become who you've become. Um, and so that community that gets created around, you know, shared experiences, your courage to say these were difficult things. You can talk to me about your difficult things. Do you have any stories of people who have, um, when they heard your story, when they read your books, came to you and explained how you were healing to them?
Yeah, this will frost your giblets. So, um, book book came out, and I get a call from somebody I haven't seen in 30 years,
Right,
maybe more.
right,
All right. So I've learned my lesson. When a vet calls, you drop what you're doing and go meet with them. Okay.
okay,
Again, read the book, and you'll understand what I mean. Okay.
okay,
When a veteran calls you up and says, "I need to talk," you stop, and you
right,
go, you go, you go. Let the veteran talk. The
right,
veteran wants to be heard. He doesn't want to be talked to.
sure,
He wants to be heard.
right,
So
makes
I've
sense.
learned, and we've learned in the community. Listen, sit there with your coffee or your beer, whatever the hell you're having with somebody, and just
Right,
shut the hell up and listen. Okay.
right,
So we get this guy, he calls me up. He goes, we go down, we meet for wings. I'm drinking a soda. He's drinking a whatever the hell he was drinking. Picked up a wing, and we weren't 5 minutes into it. And he goes, read the book. "Yeah, I'm sorry." I said, "Oh, thank you." He goes, "But I got to tell you, your book stopped me from committing suicide."
wow, Yeah.
Now, full stop. Okay. I wasn't ready for this. I
Sure.
wasn't ready for the responsibility. And I
Yeah.
certainly wasn't ready for the right. I wasn't ready for the commitment.
Right.
Right. And then I didn't know what to say. So I
Sure.
did what I did what I always do. You know, all right. What can I say?
Sure.
Right. So now take the opposite of that. My next book came out a week before it was released. Another shipmate of mine committed suicide
Mm,
7 days before the latest book was released. Okay. That same day, another guy in the service, his daughter committed suicide.
oh my
So this
goodness.
this epidemic is not limited to veterans. But
Yes.
what I say is what we are doing as veterans is telling the civilian community it's okay to commit suicide. Because how are the civilians supposed to feel that how are they going to suck it up if we're not? So what we're doing, they are following. And I'm not just making that up. I'm doing that from funerals, from listening to the family members of veterans who have committed suicide
Sure.
and watching the dominoes fall through the family. The
Yeah.
suicide rate among civilians is somewhere north of 1 to 200 a day. Nobody knows. Nobody knows the math.
Sure. Well, and I'll tread into these comments lightly because they're not. It's a topic that I don't have a good handle on in terms of my own ability to talk about it calmly. Um, but I had a nephew who was 18 and he killed himself, an 18-year-old boy. And I would say it's exacerbated by a mental illness that, was extreme, exacerbated probably by some drug usage. But there was a road for him that other than suicide. And that when you talk about that now, what opened the door for those thoughts and what opened the door for that happening, it's not something that I can be clear about. Like I don't think I know how that happened, but the notion that suicide has become more prevalent, has become more across the board, as you say, um, is something that is present now in my life in a non-theoretical way, and was among the most profoundly difficult. Could have been potentially destructive to the family. And although the family was devastated by the circumstance, I think we hung together through it more than, you know, came apart from it. But
Well, let me jump in there and ask you a question.
sure,
How many family members were affected by that suicide?
all of them wasn't
10,
there.
50,
Oh, in
100?
terms of people, oh, I mean, that's hard to, I mean, yeah, 50 at a
So,
minimum.
so you're picking a number of 50. So one veteran suicide, let's use your number, affects 50 family members,
Sure.
friends.
Yeah,
Okay. Now multiply 50 times 50
sure.
every day
Yeah. Yeah. It's 2,500 people a day,
are,
25,000 every 10
are,
days.
are affected. Correct.
Sure.
Okay.
75,000 over the month.
In
Yeah.
the last week, I've had half a dozen people send me messages on social media
Sure.
telling me my 19-year-old, my 17-year-old, my 21-year-old, my 22-year-old. I haven't gotten anybody in the 30s or better recently.
Yeah.
Okay. But there's this wave of 18, 17 to 20 something that I'm being informed right now, literally every day. This person, this person, this
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. In our community, which is uh, not a community under threat where I live, like I live in a community that is ordinary in its disposition, right? Like I'm not in a where people are having to think about their personal safety. I mean, the issues of the community, we're in an ordinary situation. And I mean, the number of kids that have OD'd, we've had a murder in the community where a teenager beat another teenager to death. Um, the, suicides that we have experienced, there's something not the same in the community of that age group, that 16 to 25. I don't know what it is, but it is definitely, I think about, the violence both between people and back into themselves, just different than as I was a kid in the 80s. Um, I think about fights that I was in, right? Like I was in these fights, but the fights were like ordinary fights. They were just, young men in a regular fight, and the consequences of it felt, meaningful, but they were not lethal. Like I was never in a fight where someone was going to kill me, you know. So we had this murder in the community where this kid brought, just beat this child, beat this 17-year-old to death among other kids too. So it wasn't even like a one-to-one sort of fight. Um, yeah, it's perplexing to me. It's sad to me. It's shocking to me. It's scary to me. And as you're talking about, like what you multiply, what you're talking about, 75,000 people being affected in this constellation over the course of a year, that's 1 million people. So, every year for however many years, it's a lot of, that's a meaningful portion of the whole country. Well, when you wrote your book and you've created a community, do you have some, beyond the notion of just talking, do you have some advice that you might have to somebody who's listening for maybe first steps? Maybe they don't know what to do. Maybe they don't know what the first thing they should, move towards
Yeah,
to get better.
yeah. So again, in my book, A Date with Suicide,
Right.
one of the key things early on is the fact that I lay out what we're going to be getting into.
Okay.
And for me, I also wrote an article called A Busload of Veterans.
Okay.
And at the end of that 1,500 word article, it
Mm-hmm.
says starting points. What are our starting points? Well, it's the same
Right.
thing because it's also in the forward
Okay.
of my book. Okay, so this is book one in a series, and I'm sorry for jumping around a little bit. There's a lot to say on this to answer that question.
Sure.
So I've got 40 or 50 topics outlined for the next 10 books that are going to follow book one of A Date
Okay.
with Suicide.
Right.
But I made the decision to keep this thing simple. Work in a grid of four. Okay. 4 topics, 2 questions. So the 2 questions always seem to be the same 2 questions. What happened to me and why?
Okay.
Those were the 2 questions that originally I asked myself back in the early 90s when I said there's something wrong with me,
Right.
right? What happened to me and why? And I've listened to countless vets say the same thing, sober and not sober,
Right.
crying, not crying.
Right.
What happened to me? So that's the focus point, the starting point. What happened to you and why? And I come at it from the starting point of 4 questions. What is a veteran and why don't we feel like veterans?
Right.
Okay? If you feel like a veteran and because you've earned that badge, but you don't walk around with that pride,
Right.
that's a problem. That's one piece that can lead to suicide. Okay. The other 3 things I talk about is transitioning from the military,
Mm-hmm.
trauma, and
Right.
then talking about your experience.
Mm-hmm.
So I keep it limited to those 4 things in book one. What is a veteran? Trauma, transition, and telling your story. Okay. And again, you don't need to call me up and tell me your story, but I'm happy to listen.
Right.
You just need to tell your story. Tell your wife, tell your friend, tell your mother, tell somebody. And
Right.
start it by saying, I'm going to talk to you, but just shut up and listen
Right.
and just start spitting it out because
Yeah.
your story matters.
Yes. Wow. All right. Well, let's go through your books again so that way people know. Can you get them on Amazon? How do you get these books?
Yeah, the shortest path is Amazon or any of the major outlets, Barnes and Noble and so on. But Amazon, um, you know, Amazon is the simplest way to get it there. If you want to reach out to me and get an autographed copy, happy to do it. But these are the 2 most current books. Both of them are book one in a series. Okay,
Okay.
this book's got about 100 reviews, mostly 5-star. If you look at the reviews on Amazon on this book, there's some pretty compelling reviews. And the biggest takeaway I'll give to you on both books, more people will read it that are not veterans than are veterans.
Sure.
The way to get to the veteran is to read the book so that you understand
Yeah.
what's happening in the mind of the veteran
Hmm.
and then hand them the book. Okay. Doesn't matter whether the veteran reads it or not. What matters is that he has a tool sitting there.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason it says a date with suicide
Hmm.
is because that's the final step before you kill yourself. All the rest of the planning, everything else. Okay. We got to get to the vets before they set a date. Okay. Once they set a date, you don't hear about it. You don't hear anything. You
Yeah.
just find out.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, my I'm not a veteran, and one of the things I associate, with military, with veterans, with people who've been trained like that, is the notion to accomplish the mission. And so, if you were set a date, you kind of created a mission of sorts, and so there are, there's the notion of attempting suicide, but when you're used to being effective, or you're trained to be effective, it would seem to me that there are less attempts and more, where they're
Oh,
successful.
oh
Yeah.
no. I get into it. I
Uh,
tell an unbelievable story of an
okay.
attempted suicide.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a great story and one that nobody saw coming. Okay.
Okay.
So, and including me. And
Okay.
again, hit the trauma of that attempted suicide
Yeah.
hung on to me for decades. And I didn't know how angry I was over it.
Yeah.
Okay. Until I wrote the book and went, wow, wow. I didn't realize how pissed off I was that guy was trying to kill himself.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, all right. So book number one was 2,442 Steps to Crazy. You can get that on Amazon. Book two is A Date with Suicide. This is the beginning of a 10-book series. And so I'm sure as you read book one, you're going to be looking for book two. And I mean, the work you're doing, it's as important a work as a person can do. So thank you for hanging in and not making the choices to imagine all the people that would not have benefited from all of this hard work that you've done on yourself. And now you've translated that into hard work for other people. It's amazing. Thank you.
Well, I didn't want to face the baby Jesus at the pearly gates and let him down. So figured I better listen to him and write the damn book and stay alive.
All right. Well, all right. You're in a different mission. Well, D. Paul Fleming, thank you. And I'm grateful you spent some time with us.
Hey, I'm grateful you taking the time letting me on your show. Keep the faith, keep moving forward.
Excellent. All right. Well, today's modern revolutionary is D. Paul Fleming, and he's got quite a story, obviously. And I hope that you're, inspired. I hope that you feel like you understand things a little bit differently. I hope that you go pursue some learning with his books. And I also hope that it encouraged you to bring your story to the world because the modern revolution needs us all.
A little weird.